It's Douglas and Jessica here to talk about that word that nobody really knows what it means, and we don't really say it too often because we're like, nobody knows what it means. But we are I don't even know how to spell it, but if you don't know how to spell it, could you call yourself a facilitator?
I think a lot of people can.
So, a lot of companies that you've worked at, Douglas, before in your IT world, in your software developing, when you heard a facilitator was coming to do a workshop, did you groan? And are you now that
Mm.
facilitator that comes?
Well, I don't know if I ever groaned ahead of time, but I definitely have experienced some trainers or workshops or sessions where it's like, oh wow, this left a little bit to be desired. But I think as we define it, well, the best way to summarize it maybe is how we put it in our book Magical Meetings, which is there's no such thing as bad meetings, just bad facilitators. And so if
Nice.
you're the reason that there was a bad meeting, it was probably because you didn't bring good facilitation principles and techniques into that session, into that gathering.
And I guess your academy appeals to managers so they can learn facilitation. They don't want to become a facilitator. They just have to manage their people. So they need these skills. Is that what you often see coming through? Or do you see people like me who are trained in it who just want to get like top level skills from you guys?
We see both. It's really interesting because you've got folks that are kind of brand new that are aspiring to be a full-time facilitator. We see a lot of folks that are in-house professionals that
Mm,
might range from chief of staff to a project manager to a product manager. These kinds of roles that are responsible for gathering stakeholders and
mm,
keeping them aligned and connected and understanding where things might go. Um, and it's really interesting when you look at how these diverse cohorts work because when you've got someone novice and someone more experienced and someone who's not even wanting to be a full-time facilitator in the mix, the
mm,
questions they ask, the scenarios they bring to the table are all different and they
mm.
all feed off of each other. In fact, uh, my friend's a black belt in jujitsu, and he told me, he's like, I learned so much more from some random person that walks in the door for the first time than I do rolling with other black belts
Mm,
because the newbies do surprising things. They ask the strange questions, and then it makes us think about things in a whole new way.
mm. Love that. You probably do know that, but it just hit my head, and I've been hearing this word for 10 years since I've been in the no, 8 years since I've been in the International Association of Facilitators. Do you know
Mhm.
what facile means in French?
Yes. Well, I don't know about French, but I always think about the Latin root. Tell me about the
Oh,
French.
well, it's the same word, easy.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so the
Yes.
Asian of easy, making the process of making things easier, right? Like, duh. Of course, we all need to have these skills. Like every marriage should say, and I will take a course from Douglas on facilitation so that we won't get divorced at year 70.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hear the verb used a lot, like, with someone talking about facilitating a process or like, if there's some large initiative underway, like, oh, I'm facilitating that. You often hear it used that way, and it's from that lens, or and to your point, to make easy that I think a lot of these tools and processes are really rooted. It's like, how can we ensure we're going to get really good outcomes?
Hmm. I do have a kind of selfish question, if you would allow the white belt to ask a question. It's it's been drawn. How do I say this? It's been brought to my attention by myself that I'm loud, and I think like a loud person. So when I'm in a meeting, I am the extroverted loud person. Okay, so that was me like 5 years ago, and I still have that energy, but now I know how to control it. I know how to give space. I've
Mhm.
learned facilitation, all these things, but I still understand those people. And then I try and lead now my workshops and my sessions so that the introverts, the quieter people, the people with less opportunity to speak, the people of minorities, that they have opportunity. And it's really hard to get the loud old whiteys to quiet down. Do you have like a whole section dedicated to creating psychological safety and like
Mm.
managing that space, or do you have like one or two habits that you guys secretly do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a an important element of facilitation, and certainly something we talk about, we spend time on, and especially for folks that are uh, struggling with that specifically, it can come up a lot in the office hours and the one-on-ones as we're kind of working through things. And
Mm,
we'll encourage folks to demonstrate that on their portfolio as they're building it out, that sort of stuff.
mm,
The personally, and this is where I think this is an interesting thing because people get really focused on activities and techniques, and a lot of programs will teach from the perspective of activities and techniques, and like, so some even like, this is the framework. Here are the 30 activities, and these are the ones you need to know, and you're good.
mm,
My approach has always been the techniques and tools that are going to be the richest and most valuable in the toolkit are more
mm,
about how I show up,
mm,
what is the inner voice that I'm having with myself, and how
mm,
do I train and adapt that, and what are the ways that the little things that I might introduce to help me better in certain situations. And so one thing that can be really helpful in scenarios like you're describing is uh, how we frame the problem, because so often, too often, I would say, people come to me and say, "How do I deal with difficult people?" And I was like, "Well, the first thing you need to do is stop calling them difficult people." Right? Because as soon as you frame someone as an overtalker or
mm,
a difficult person, or they're bad because they have this quality,
yeah,
now we've alienated them, right? They're a villain almost. And so what we had to do is take that reframe of like, what's causing that behavior in
yeah,
this specific moment for that specific person, and
yeah,
how might I work around it? Now, getting to specific actionable stuff, sometimes people talk a lot out of nervousness, right? Because they just want to kind of get it all out. And so some techniques of allowing people to get things out but not occupying airtime.
mhm,
There's a sometimes solo quiet work, and then paired with some smaller group work can be
okay,
really powerful because they get things out. Sometimes someone just has something to get off their chest, and I've even just stood up at the whiteboard or typed into the Miro, and so they watch their masterpiece unfolding before them,
mhm,
and then they're done, right? And then they're staring off at that later on, right? It's similar to like the parking lot technique, right? Like we might parking lot things that are occupying too much attention and
mm,
shifting, but all of that is impossible unless we start with our purpose. And I think that is where a lot of people get rocky,
mm,
especially in like 30-minute meetings, because
mm,
oftentimes those will be ritualized, or we're just doing them over week after week, et cetera, et cetera. And we sort of forget why we're doing them. Right. And so the more we can clarify the purpose to ourselves and then
mm,
to participants, we can
mm,
often get past some of these uncomfortable, dysfunctional behaviors.
mm,
And and then also, I think a lot of people fall short of getting the participants clarity because they clarify it to themselves and then
mhm,
think that everyone else is clear. Like, because once it's like clear in my head, of course everyone else understands it, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so even simple things like, starting off the meeting with intentions, or
nice,
doing like a hopes and fears, or some kind of activity that will help people get really aligned
mhm,
on what it is. And another pro tip is moving past the jargon. We talk about clarity being so important.
mhm,
And if we can clarify the purpose to the point where we're not using like, some slogan that
yeah,
we are always using for that project, we're not using jargon. We get really, really clear on why
yeah,
we're here and like the intention. Oftentimes that can help us get past a lot of over talking, because people don't feel like they're having to like
hmm,
get some sort of alignment, right? If we're facilitating the alignment,
yeah,
then now everyone can sit in that space more comfortably.
hmm. It just seems so clear when you say it. I'm like, yeah, yeah, of course I know that. Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's like, and then they're common sense things like have a structure, have the limits, set the
Yes.
intentions, da da da. And it's like, well, who does that? Because people are overwhelmed, or they haven't learned that skill.
Yes.
Or one of the biggest things that I notice in life is that we're afraid, of course, and I get it, and I am that, but I'm pushing myself. We're afraid of like confronting the authority. So, of course, whoever
Mm,
pays your bills, you're not really going to challenge them on their facilitation process of your meetings every week. Like they didn't ask your opinion. And yet, if you could be part of the change, that could maybe be rewarded or it could not be rewarded. So, this standing up to the structures and changing the status quo facing the patriarchy, like these kind of things that need to shift the way things are done and meetings are ran, and the hierarchy is structured, that takes some balls to like.
Yes.
And it's super scary even for me, and I'm like a 6 foot tall, not scared of kind of like anything kind of girl, and I still go, oh, how do you encourage people? I guess, is there hope?
Yeah, I mean, speaking truth to power is difficult, right?
Mhm.
And there are certain people that are like just hardwired to do it. And so like, those people can be helpful allies, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think there there's a lot of power in um small group interactions, because if truth emerges in the small groups, then
Mhm.
now it's not just one person facing the masses, right? And so also there's techniques for like anonymous crowd sourcing ideas. Like Liberating Structures has a fantastic one called 2510.
Yeah.
I love it because it's a random voting element. The cream generally rises, and for a short amount of time and investment you get some interesting stuff. So anonymity, the power of kind of small groups, the power of thinking about local solutions. So
Mhm.
like instead of trying to take on the big giant thing, what's going to help here locally? And then maybe that takes off in some infectious way. Or like if it's hard to shift this one department, we know we need to change this department, but they're not listening, or it might be too tough to do that. What's an analogous department somewhere that's not getting any attention? Like
Mhm.
maybe HR, maybe trainings, like they would benefit from the same innovation, but like they're a lot more receptive. Go work with them, build a case study, and then now we can demonstrate like how great this is, and maybe these other people. So it's not
Mhm.
just me trying to like convince someone. It's now I'm starting to build this momentum. It's sort of like my friend Greg Sittel wrote this awesome book called Cascades, where he studied social movements and how to benefit from these things. And so if you're looking at the wide spectrum of folks involved, um, it's about engaging with the supporters rather than speaking to the detractors. Because if you speak to the detractors, it can be very exhausting, and you're kind of arming them with information. Now, if you're in a space where you have to, because it's like, hey, like this is where I'm operating, I can't go build alliances elsewhere. Like this meeting I'm facilitating, appealing to values is really powerful.
Mhm.
I think when folks try to like position to someone else's based on their own values, they're trying
Mhm.
to position something.
Mhm.
It doesn't always translate, and a lot of times people try to sell the benefits of a thing rather than the outcomes or the value or or why someone would care. So
Mhm.
individualizing, and then finally, if you can avoid a sales pitch altogether,
Mhm.
so involving people in the creation of the thing, and a lot of the modern day facilitation techniques are really rooted in kind of co-creation and collaborative authoring of stuff. And so
Mhm.
if we're prototyping and making together, now that other person has now invested their efforts and their mind share into the thing. And
Mhm.
so and you don't have to tell them it's a great idea. You don't have to get buy-in because they have a sense of ownership.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Huh.
Now, also, I'll say this, some situations are untenable. That's where bringing in an outside facilitator can be really powerful, because now you got that dynamic. Or if you got folks in your organization that are boundary spanners, so they're not, you know, they might not, even though they're in the same org, they might not report up into that individual with the power.
Yeah.
They might not be, that person might not be in control of their performance reviews or whatever. So you could bring that person in. Maybe they're a chief of staff or program manager or whatever. That's kind of a spanning boundaries in the organization. Maybe there's some way you bring them in as the facilitator, and then they can kind of be a little bit more no one's ever truly unbiased. I know there's a lot of belief that like facilitators should be neutral and unbiased, but the fact of the matter is like you're a human with a brain with feelings and emotions. So there is bias. The fact that I'm showing up in the room means I'm changing the temperature and the way the room smells, right? There's some bias. But like we don't want to be pushing our opinions on people, right? And so I think that it shifts that, and it shifts the impression people have too, because it's like, well, I'm not they're not responsible for me, I'm not responsible for them in
Mhm.
this kind of reporting structure.
Hmm. Are you Do you know open space technology?
Yes, I love it.
Do you love it? Okay. And you mentioned just briefly about a tool that you use to get like everybody's input, even in like hundreds of people conferences. Can you tell me a little bit more about like how
Yeah,
that?
2510. Have you used it before?
I haven't heard of it. No.
Oh, great. I love this. All right. So, um, comes from Liberating Structures, a repertoire of 34 like activities and methods. And they also have like a nice unifying framework of like just good facilitation advice and also I would say navigating complexity.
Okay.
So 2510 is a kind of a crowdsourcing technique. So basically, we're going to ask folks, and I've done this with at a conference with 500 people,
Mm.
all doing this at the same time.
Mm.
So you basically hand out note cards. I like to use um, 5x8 note cards, so nice big fat ones with no lines on them.
Okay.
And you give them a Sharpie or something, and
Hmm.
then you ask them to write their big idea on the front on one side of this thing.
Okay.
And ideally, they're writing their idea and the first step to take action. Like,
Oh.
what's the because you want, and it's to encourage people to both be bold, but
Yeah.
also it needs to be grounded enough to where it's clear what you do to get started. Because like, if you're like, yeah, let's all move to Mars, it's like, okay, well, how does that even start, right? And so, so anyway, they put their idea, their first step, and then after they have time to write their idea down, we start some music and
Mhm.
usually play some upbeat music, like maybe 80 BPM. And then we ask people to start moving around and exchanging cards. So when someone walks by you, you grab their card, they grab yours, and you're just shuffling the cards. So you're randomizing through the room, right?
Yeah.
And the music's fun and loud. And then boom, you pause the music and you say, okay, stop where you are. Whatever idea is in your hand, read the idea,
Hmm.
flip it over, and on the back you're gonna wrote one to five. One being it's this is so bad, like I don't even know who would support this, all the way up to five. This is so good, I want to actively support it.
Okay.
And then you put the music on again, shuffle
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
and then read whatever idea you landed in your hand. Flip it over, vote. You do 5 rounds of voting. There's
Okay.
another tip where if you get the same idea you've gotten before, or you get yours, just quickly trade with someone next to you.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
At the end of the 5 rounds, we just have everyone add up all the scores.
Hmm.
The top score is 25. If for some
Oh.
reason you get a card that has more than 5 or less than 5, you can drop the extra one or duplicate the next highest one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the reason it's 25-10, top score is 25, we'll read out the top 10.
Oh.
So then I'll say, anyone got a 25? And I'll
Uh-huh.
run over and like have them read out their idea, or I'll do it for them if I'm trying to move a little faster.
Yeah.
Anyone got a 9? Anyone got an 8?
Hmm.
It can be really fun way of harvesting kind of
Hmm.
some innovative kind of thinking, see where people are. Really great way to energize. I mean, people are up moving around really
Yeah.
fast to like some 80 BPM, then they're gonna wake them up from that post lunch slump.
I can't help but ask, but did you bring 500 Sharpies with you? That's
Yes.
woo.
And I did have the wherewithal. I'm not always this ahead of the game, because sometimes I get caught and go, oh, literally, I'm handing out 500 markers. And but in that case, I was smart enough to get some volunteers from the staff to be like, I got all these markers, so I'm gonna need some help distributing them.
Okay, I love that. So we're doing these interview series because we're running a conference call. Have you heard? Probably not, because you're from your accent. You're not from Europe.
No.
Change Days. It was in Berlin. It's like been around for 16 years.
Oh,
No?
cool.
Yeah. So the idea is we're change agents. We're doing the open space. It's all about joyful learning. There's space to learn, space to digest, and we co-create it. So this open space is something that like 90% of my facilitator friends haven't even heard of. And I'm not
Mm.
including those ones who are in like the serious play or the play 14 or the improv world, because all of us, we're doing all the stuff that you're talking about. Because I suppose we've already adopted kind of that. Oh, now I make my 90% of friends feel bad that they don't know these things. But there is a divide, I think. It's like
Yeah.
Old school PowerPoint. How do you describe a facilitator? What's your definition?
Oh, I have a long definition, but it's generally anyone who's making a process easier.
Okay. Okay. With a whiteboard and markers.
Well, I mean, if that's your tool and you're good at it, then the thing is I like to be tool and method agnostic. And so if you are bringing the right perspective, and we talk about facilitation skills being rooted in 5 principles, right? They're purposed, they're
Mm,
inclusive,
mm,
they're crafted, they're
mhm,
clear, and they're
mm,
adaptive.
mm.
Because if we're too rigid in our process and we're not allowing the emergent things that need to happen, then we're ultimately stifling the group.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. And so you're a trainer of facilitators when you do this work. Would you
Yes.
call yourself that? Because I seem to be like I'm in the International Association of Facilitators in Qatar, like I don't know, like name other 5 other associations. I'm in these, and a lot of it is still very, and I don't know if the right word is old school, but they haven't been studying facilitation techniques. It's almost like they got
Mm,
stuck with a trainer, got their corporate reputation, and are like doing the whiteboard and like the monologuing and like training. And research has been showing, my friend from Gleek, it's a Dubai like mentorship coaching program, just showed me research that it's like it's not the mindset, it's not that changes people. It's not inspirational stories from Toastmasters that I was in Los Angeles 2 days ago. It's the habit changing. It's like
yes.
change behavior. Punto. Everything else you can read in a book, and I stopped reading books because I stopped doing the stuff I'm supposed to do. Right? I have to change like
Yep.
today. So and you're saying, yeah, but is that the mentality of like be present, be now, changing behaviors, or
Yeah, and I guess the way we would frame that is practice makes practice. And so in order to become a great facilitator, you have to practice these skills. It's not about you can't just read them in a book, right?
yeah.
And so that's the reason why we don't really do 1 day, 2 day, or even a week long kind of things.
Hmm.
Our program is 3 months long,
Oh wow.
with 3 hour touch points each week. And
Wow.
so there's some new concepts being unveiled, and you're incentivized to put them in action because if you don't, then you won't have anything to put in your portfolio,
Yeah.
right? And so the other thing is we have a bunch of free opportunities for people to show up and practice. We call
Oh.
this the community is called Facilitation Lab, but
Oh,
the actual structure and workshop that I run is called Practice Playground. So it's kind of an open space kind of approach where people are